Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry we had a small delay. It's 1:02. We'd like to welcome you to the Facebook Live with information around the market rate survey updates. First and foremost, we wanted to let you know that you are able to write comments in this Facebook Live. So if you have questions or you have anything that you would need to comment around this information, please feel free to do so. And also let us know maybe what area you are or county you're in, so that we can understand what community that you are writing us from. My name is Renee Withers. I am the Deputy Director of the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning, and our goal today is to talk about a few things around the market rate survey. We want to make sure you have a clear understanding of what our responsibility as the office and what we are mandated to make sure that we provide information by the federal government when it comes to the market rate survey. The other thing that we focus on today is letting you know about the process, how we complete it, who does the process, what the market rate actually is, survey is, and why we have to complete it or would like for everyone to complete it. And then also give you some information to reiterate the increase that happened this past month, and kind of give some clarity around that. So that is the information we'll cover today. So as we go through the slides, please feel free, once again, to write any comments or questions, and we'll make sure we try to address them during the Facebook Live. Okay, and I'm trying to get to the next slide, and it's not going, so give us 1 second. Having some technical difficulties. All right. So what we want you to understand first and foremost, we as the office are required by law as a state agency to make sure that there are specific things that are a part of the early childhood system, and that we have to make sure is available when we think about how we do market rate surveys. So there are certain things we have to make sure that you have available as a provider or as programs out in the field. We need to make sure that you have a full choice, a choice of a full range of providers is available. So making sure it is real important to us that we have different providers that provide services across the state. So just as we have family child care homes, we have licensed centers, we have registered ministries, as well as LLEP, legally licensing exempt providers, which are our public schools, homes, and private schools. The other thing, when we think about our requirements for market rates, we also want to make sure that market rates are based on surveying the population and the cost of care. So we'll talk more about that as we move further through the Facebook Live. But the most important part is understanding that that survey that we put out is based upon the information you give us and the cost of care that you have in your community out in the field. The other thing that we have to make sure that is happening across the field is that our base rates always are supporting the health, safety, and quality and staffing. So we want to make sure the base rates that we are setting as a market rate, they are meeting the needs where you as a provider can provide a healthy environment, a safe environment for children, maintain a quality environment, and most of all, you're able to pay your staff and maintain staff so that you can provide quality care. The other important thing is also the cost for higher quality care is addressed. So when we look at that, we want to make sure that higher quality care, we make sure that you're meeting the cost needs to make sure that you're able to fulfill the needs of whether it's you're on paths to quality, whether you need specific items for becoming accredited, and so forth. The other things that are required, we also want to make sure we want to keep co-payments affordable. We do understand when we talk about subsidy payments, co-payments sometimes are applicable in some different setting types. And we want to make sure families have the ability to afford co-payments that are not to the point where they can't access childcare because they cannot afford it. The other thing that is very important for us as a system is to make sure that payment practices ensure equal access. So we want to make sure that everyone has access to quality child care, no matter what county, what area of the state they're living in, as well as that equal access regardless of what type of care there is. The other thing is differential payments rates may be considered. And then additional facts are considered. And when we think about those additional facts, when we think about those things, that is information that could be, you know, whether or not you have additional costs, thinking about, you know, some sites do transportation, some different sites may charge a registration fee. So when we think about all different things like that, we have to take additional facts into consideration. They realize for people to be able to be successful when they think about how their early childhood site can be successful. So these are required, I guess you would say, required aspects that we have to meet, that is mandated by the federal government. So this is not just by choice. Once again, I will say this is actually a law that we have to make sure these requirements are met. So as we look at this slide, we're really looking at, okay, what happens? Why is a market rate survey done? Learning by the federal government is required to conduct a market rate survey, and we actually conduct this market rate survey every 3 years. So that is mandated as a part of our state plan, and then that information is reported back to the federal government through our state plan, and then also that's where you may see those market rates come out when you see the different increases, or sometimes they stay the same, but that is how that is conducted. We also, when we think about the market rate survey, when setting payment rates, the Office of Early Childhood must also analyze the estimated cost of providing childcare. So that's why we ask you there, lots of times when we do those provider updates, when we send that information, or you get that phone call, or you may have your coach come in, or you may get a phone call from your CCR&R, which is your Child Care Resource and Referral. They're asking, what is the cost that you charge for your children? That is that information that we use within that market rate survey to help drive and figure out the estimated cost of providing childcare. That goes into that market rate survey. So when you think about our market rate survey, we collect a lot of different data that is required to be collected so that we can then report this back to the federal government. Some things are required by the federal government that is listed here in this slide. So we actually have to make sure, and it is required for us to report on these specific items. So we have to ask about your prices charged by category. So lots of times when you get that information coming from Early Learning Indiana, when they're doing provider updates, and they may call you or your CCR&R, as well as sometimes your coaches may bring out that form for you to fill out. They may ask you, you know, the age of children you serve, your geographic area that you're in, what type of care you provide. So that is something that's mandated that we have to ask. The other data that we have to collect is the number or the percentage of providers that are accepting subsidy, which is CCDF, and by geography, to ensure equity. So we have to make sure that we have an equitable amount of providers across the state, or we have to give them that percentage or number to show where we are providing care, and then that percentage of providers who do accept subsidy, that is data that they require for us to give back to them when we hand in our state plan. The other additional data that we collect is providers' additional charges. So I know you may say, well, what does that mean? What are additional charges? So that's also what I was talking about on the last slide. You may charge a registration fee. So that's an additional charge. So lots of times when we send that provider update to you, we may ask you, do you do a registration fee? Do you have transportation fees? Some sites may have field trip fees. But those additional fees that are not required, we need to collect data around that, because we have to report that back to the federal government so that we can give them a percentage or data on how many providers have additional charges and where those additional charges lie. Another area that we also have to collect is the provider's desired capacities or average enrollment by age group. So we do have to understand your enrollment and what you serve in each age group. So that's why you find that we can't just do a provider update one time and we'll never call you again. That's why it has to at least be annual, that we call you to see what is your capacity that you are serving children, as well as your average enrollment and what age groups you serve. We also have to provide data around providers' definitions of full and part-time. So we do have some providers that are only offering part-time care. We have some that do full-time, but we have to provide that information to the federal government as well. And then providers' response rates. So just to give you an idea, lots of times you may get more than one call if you do not answer or you do not provide us with the provider update information, because it is required by the federal government, but we have a response rate of 80% to report back when we send in our state plan for the market rate survey. So 80% of our programs that are in our CCDF program have to respond back in order for us to complete our market rate survey. It's mandated to have 80% response rate. So that is why you find sometimes we're very diligent on giving you that phone call again to collect that information on a regular basis. And you may sometimes in the past have had your child care resource and referral reach out to you to get that information, as well as sometimes even your coaches or any of the specialists coming out are asking you that information. So it's real important to understand that provider update. It helps us as well as it helps you, but it also, some things are definitely needed for reporting purposes as we look at it as we move forward with making sure that we complete our state plan on a every 3-year basis. So besides those things that are mandated, we do have a few other information that is collected that is required for the market rate survey. So to give you an example, for those providers that participate in subsidy, we also have to make sure that we are providing information around any barriers to participation, including those related to low rates paid by the Office of Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning. So this is some information that we will be asking those who do provide subsidy as we do updates, and that's some of the information that we have to give back to the federal government, as well as we have to give information around providers' other charges. So that means like if you charge any differences between subsidy and price, and information about providers' generally accepted payment practices. So when you think about any differences between subsidy and price, that may think about, you know, when we're talking about, you know, sites that may have a difference of what you receive for subsidy, and then your price may be over that amount, or vice versa. There may be a co-payment that's put into practice because that family has a co-payment, as well as whatever your general accepted payment practice may be. And then the other thing that's important to understand is to the extent to which providers charge parents more than the subsidy payment. So that's the overage part. And just letting you know, programs do have the right to have an overage, and parents do have the responsibility to pay that overage. And the amount of overage that is common for most areas is what we actually have to provide data around. And basically they want to know, you know, if parents do have to pay overage, what happens if they don't? Are provider payments practices the same for all families? So I think that's some data that they would like to know, and that we have to make sure that we provide information around. So that information you will find there's open-ended questions that we may have on the provider update forms that we have to make sure we give this information back to the federal government. So one thing that's really important that we wanted to make sure that you as a listener understand why it's so important we need provider updates completed on a regular basis. One thing that happens with those provider updates, that's where we actually collect that data that I was actually speaking of in the prior slides, but also from the provider update process, the information that we get also fulfills what we have to fulfill for the market rate survey. And like we said, it only happens every 3 years, but the provider updates, we do it on an annual basis. It won't just be every 3 years. So this is something that is a practice that is normal that we do regularly. So we don't want you to take from this Facebook Live to think that it will only happen when it comes time for us to redo the state plan. The provider updates are done on a regular basis, and as well as your child care resource and referrals are the ones that pretty much reach out to you on a regular basis to make sure they have that needed information. They use those provider updates for a lot of other specific reasons that are important, just like giving an example for referrals. The referral process is also done through those provider updates, so that we're giving families up-to-date information about your site. It also helps us when we look at doing the referral process. We know who has openings. We also know what age groups you're serving. Families ask a lot of different information, and the information that you're putting in those provider updates is information that we then can provide them so they can make an informed choice of who they'd like to choose for childcare. The other important part of the provider updates is the provider cost data for the market rate survey. This is when we do collect that information, which then, like I told you before, Early Learning Indiana is the ongoing provider that does that process, and then that information is put together and sent in with our state plan. So it's twofold. The provider updates really is a benefit for not only the state and required for the federal government, but it's also a benefit for the referral process for all programs to be able to have their information out there for parents to understand exactly sometimes the cost of care, what time your care is available, what ages you're serving, and then any information that's pertinent for them to make that decision. So provider updates are really important to make sure that everyone does them on a regular basis when we're reaching out for them. So to help you understand the process, many of you probably already know that they call you, they email you, but one of the main things we just wanted to reiterate, what does that process look like? Providers in our early childhood database, you're normally contacted by Early Learning Indiana, and sometimes, lots of times, by your child care resource and referral, because they work tandem to try to make sure they get these updates done on an annual basis. And some of the things, like I said, they're looking for is actually your contact information, your vacancies, your enrollment. They're looking at that cost data for that market rate survey and other attributes about your program. Even if you have some individualized attributes that want to be shared, those are things that they can share with parents about your program, and parents are calling in to get information for referrals. As vice versa, there's some information that we also share with the federal government that shows whether there's any distinct differences or data around things that are important that we think they should know. The other thing that's important is there's different multiple methods of contacts that they will use, and we wanted to make sure we shared that with you today so that you had a good understanding that we know everyone responds to communication differently. So there's different ways that they will reach out. Lots of times outreach is done by phone, outreach is done by email. They send survey links. Like I said, you can sometimes expect some of your provider update process coming from your local child care resource and referral in your community. And as well, there's opportunities and times where you may have your coach or you may have specialists in the system that may come and do face-to-face interactions to get that information. So in the past and in the present, we have used all these mechanisms to make sure that we have tried to get that information updated for each of your locations so that you are represented in the referral process, as well as your information is taken in consideration for the market rate survey, as well as the state plan. One thing that I also want to make sure that you have a good understanding is sometimes if you feel like, well, hey, I've never received a phone call, I didn't get an email, or I didn't get the update, or my CCR&R, Child Care Resource and Referral, never reached out to me. So one thing that you can do is actually, if you would like to initiate a provider update, you're more than welcome to, and you can always reach out directly to Early Learning Indiana at the number on this slide, 1-800-299-1627, which is our solutions. Great. Thank you. And that's Kirsten, who's working with Early Learning Indiana to give you that information. So anytime you feel like you know you have not have done a provider update in a while, you can always initiate your own provider update and give them a call and give them the needed information so that your referral information is up to date, as well as your information then is taken into account as we get closer and when it comes time for that state plan and market rate survey time. So I wanted to also talk to you today. We did have a market rate increase this year. Actually, we sent out letters to all licensed centers probably mid last month, so that you all who work or have provider sites that are licensed centers would have received a letter. And basically that increase was completed around the information that you see on this slide. The market rate increase was only for infant and toddler age groups and only in licensed centers. So no other provider type received the increase besides licensed centers for the infant toddler age group. The other thing we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding, there is nothing that we expect you to do as far as like because of this increase. Everything remains the same. Rates will not be reflected in payments until families reauthorize. So you do not need to ask your families to do anything. You don't need to do anything. It's not until your families reauthorize that then that rate will be reflected in payments then. Also, if you wanted to see or have the opportunity to see the new market rates, we have the link on this page that you can use. So if you wanted to see what the new market rates for those two particular age groups in licensed center only, it's listed on this slide. So you can always go to that site, which is our on our Care Finder site. You can find the market rates that are available as of now for 2019. I know many of you may say, well, why was it only the licensed centers that were increased and why only these two age groups? We want to make sure that you have a clear understanding that this was a mandated increase by the federal government. Basically, the state of Indiana was not meeting the required payment rate for those two age groups in that particular provider type, licensed centers. We were meeting all the required payment rates for all age groups and all our other provider types, but in this one we were not. So we were mandated by the federal government to do a market rate increase for these two age groups only in licensed centers. So we don't want family child care homes or registered ministers, anybody feel like, well, we just picked these two age groups to raise the rates and didn't think about, you know, family child care homes or anybody else. It was because it was mandated and we had to do it because the federal government basically said we have to meet that required payment rate. And we do meet the required payment rate for all the other age groups and all the other provider types. So I do want to let you know that. So before I move on, I don't know, Kirsten, did we have any questions from anybody or anything that we need to address? Okay, thank you, Kirsten. So on this next slide, we wanted to make sure we provided you with some contact information and some really good resources we found around this topic. One thing, when we talk about market rates and subsidy, one thing we wanted to make sure that you had a contact at our office around CCDF subsidy. That would be Carrie Gray, and her email is on this slide. So if you had questions around any type of subsidy around that market rate topic, you could reach out to Carrie at our office, and she can get you to the right person or get you the correct information if needed. The other thing we wanted to do today is make sure we give you some different resources that could be really beneficial and helpful as you think about when it does time for us to do another market rate survey. Now, currently, we actually provided a link, which is the first resource you see on this page. The last market rate survey was done in 2018, so we won't be doing another one, once again, like I said, from 3 years from that point. But the last market rate, we have the actual survey report that is posted on our website. So that link is here for you to see so that you could have a good understanding about what information goes into that report and what report that information that we actually send over to the federal government that we're required to provide. We also wanted to also put in some business toolkit resources. And so Child Care Aware America has two great links and two great resources for homes as well as centers around some business practices and around thinking about how do you create rates for when you're starting your business, whether it's a child care center or a child care home. So we added these two links because we thought it would be some beneficial information. So if you wanted to learn more about how to generate or think about the cost of care and what that means, we added these two resources in here. And then one thing we wanted to also let you know, Indiana Learning Paths, which is many of you know as our old Training Central, also has a professional development training that focuses around how do you set your rates. It is actually called, and the title is at the bottom of this slide, it's called What Do You Charge? Rate Considerations, Sliding Fee Schedules, Scholarships, and Discounts. So this was created specifically for providers to be able to get a good idea on how do you figure out, rates? How do you consider, what do you charge parents so that your business could be sustainable? And also to think about what is true cost to run a business when it comes to childcare. I think that goes into the information as far as what we were saying is it's real important for you to have a good understanding that when we do market rate surveys, we're asking you the cost that you put into those provider updates and the cost that you give us, what you charge, is what drives the market rate survey. So if we have many people basing their cost around the current market rates we have right now as a state, or if many people actually just charge, because this is what it is in my area, so I'm just going to charge this amount, instead of thinking about what is the true cost of care? Are you really charging what is the true cost of care for you to run your business? When you think about charging and the cost of care, so that that really then takes a different turn because you're thinking about then with that business being sustainable, you're giving a true cost of care to that market rate survey. When we keep our costs and it stays around what our market rates are for the state, then what happens is that amount stays flat. And we know we hear a lot from many people that, well, the market rate never changes or it never goes up enough for me to say it's a big difference. So what information you give us as providers and what you charge for a cost really drives that aspect of where the market rates go. So it's really important for you to really make sure when you give us your cost, really think about, are you giving us the cost where truly is the cost of what it is to run your business and what you truly need to be charging parents, or is that cost just based upon, what the market rates are now? So we just want to make sure we give that as a food for thought because, the market rates are really geared around what information you provide us. We don't set the market rates. We really go off of the data and the information that we receive back from that 80% that respond to the market rate survey. So I hope that gives some clarity around the importance of the provider update, how you drive the market rate, and it really lies in your hands. And so that's why you see on one of the slides that I had, it's really what you give us and what you say makes a difference and drives what the market rate will be like. So it was real important to make sure we share that with you today because you're the ones who set that market rate. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay.
I encourage folks to go ahead and hop over there. I shared that link in the conversation too. So just that there are any question marks about that, that looks like the right spot to go to by policy.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's important when you do hit that link, you need to make sure you scroll down and you'll see it'll say the dates of what those market rates are. So yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, as far as the new market rate? Yes. So just want to reiterate, yes, the new market rate that was put out, once again, is only for licensed centers for infants and toddlers, was mandated by the federal government. And yeah, so just to reiterate, it is important that you understand we didn't just do it because it was the time for the market rate change, or how we normally, if we do it across the board for, you know, the entire group or the entire state or the entire, I guess you would say, provider types. This particular one was mandated. We had to have it done by a particular time. And it was really just due to the fact that we were not in compliance meeting the required market rate for those two age groups in licensed centers. So that is the only reason why that increase was done in the middle of this year. Correct. Providers, you do not need to do anything with that increase. Parents will actually, when they go to reauthorize, that's when that new market rate difference will go into effect. There's nothing to be expected for providers or programs to do for that increase. Yeah, so thank you for being on here this afternoon, or those of you who listen to the recorded one. Hopefully this will give you a little information around market rates and provider updates and the importance of them. And feel free, if you ever had any questions, you can always reach out to our office. You can always reach out to the Solution Center at Early Learning Indiana. But we appreciate you being on here this afternoon, and thank you very much.